At 4:17 in the morning, 312 miles from the Venezuelan coast, a German-built submarine made the softest noise imaginable. It was a faint hydraulic sigh as its torpedo doors slid open. Aboard the Sabalo, 64 Venezuelan sailors believed they were about to make history. Their target, the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's $13 billion supercarrier. They were convinced they could cripple it, but what they didn't know was that history had already been decided 6 days earlier in Norfolk, Virginia. Analysts there had predicted this exact strike before the submarine even left port. The hunter had already become the prey. A full half-hour before the Venezuelan commander even thought about launching, 3 American Virginia-class submarines were already in position. They had formed a silent, invisible triangle around the Sabalo. The distances were precise: 1,800, 2,100, and 2,400 yards. The sonar teams on the USS Mississippi weren't just tracking the sub's movement. They were listening to individual valves turning inside the enemy's hull. Over the final hour, they recorded 23 separate mechanical signatures, from hydraulic pumps and ballast shift all the way to the captain's own voice echoing over the intercom. Each American sub was armed with 2 Mark 48 advanced capability torpedoes. Their firing solutions were being updated every 12 seconds, locking onto the Sabalo's engine room, its reactor, and its command center. The Venezuelan crew, feeling the thrill of the hunt, thought they were executing a brilliant surprise attack. In reality, they were drifting helpless inside a kill box that had been established for full days earlier. The most chilling part of this whole encounter was the patience. U.S. submarines had been shadowing their target for 96 straight hours, close enough to obliterate them at any moment. They were just waiting for the precise second when the message they were about to send would cut the deepest. And then there was the carrier itself, the ship that missed nothing. At 4:12, 5 minutes before the Sabalo even started flooding its torpedo tube, the USS GeraldRFord's advanced SPY-6 radar detected the submarine's periscope slicing through the water's surface. That morning, the carrier's Combat Information Center was juggling 847 separate contacts at once. This included a dozen merchant ships, 6 fishing boats, a few pleasure craft, and 4 Venezuelan patrol boats 80 miles away. And, of course, 1 very noisy submarine trying to hide in a thermal shadow. The Ford's computers ran fire control scenarios the Venezuelans couldn't even dream of. They calculated potential airstrikes from F-18 Super Hornets that could reach the sub in for minutes. They had cruise missiles on escort destroyers ready to fire in 90 seconds. They even had MH-60R Seahawk helicopters already in the air, armed with torpedoes. When the Sabalo finally launched its weapon, the Ford systems identified the incoming torpedo just 7 seconds later. The computers calculated a 0.003% chance of impact based on its speed, trajectory, and known technical flaws. Onboard the Ford, readiness levels never changed. Pilots continued their training exercises. The mess hall served breakfast right on time. Why? Because every system aboard the carrier already knew the threat was neutralized before it even became a real threat. At 4:18, the SUT heavyweight torpedo blasted from the Sabalo's Tube 1 on a burst of compressed air. Its electric motor spun to life as 1,200 meters of thin copper guidance wire streamed out behind it. The torpedo accelerated to 23 knots, racing toward the Ford's last known position, 18 miles away. Its propellers churned the water, creating an acoustic signature so loud that passive sonar could hear it from 40 miles away. Back on the Sabalo, the fire control officers watched their screens with pride. The readouts looked perfect, wire guidance was intact, the seeker was active, and the depth was holding steady at 60 meters. They were utterly convinced their $1.2 million weapon was performing flawlessly, but there was so much they couldn't see. They couldn't see the thermocline layer of colder water at 85 meters bending the sonar returns and creating a false image. They couldn't see the 3 American submarines silently shifting their positions to get the perfect firing angle. And they certainly couldn't see the P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft circling at 28,000 feet, feeding real-time targeting data to the entire American strike group. The torpedo ran straight and true for exactly 840 seconds. Then its outdated guidance system made a fatal mistake. It locked onto a sharp temperature gradient in the water instead of the massive steel hull of the carrier. The torpedo spent its final moments circling a patch of empty ocean, while its intended target watched from a safe distance. Then came the ping that ended it all. A close-range active sonar pulse isn't just loud. It physically shakes a submarine's hull. The USS Mississippi's sonar system transmitted at 235 decibels that's like standing next to a rocket at liftoff. Inside the Sabalo, the shockwave was devastating. Light bulbs shattered, mugs crashed to the deck. One sailor's eardrum ruptured from the intense pressure wave. But this wasn't just noise. That single ping carried encoded data. It broadcast the Sabalo's exact depth, speed, and heading, and even pinpointed the precise spot where two American torpedoes were aimed at its engine room. The Venezuelan sonar operator recognized the signature instantly. He had studied it in training simulations. It was the final sound Soviet submarines heard during NATO military exercises in the Cold War. For the Venezuelan captain, what broke him wasn't the fear of death. It was the sudden, crushing realization that American submarines had been close enough to destroy his boat for 4 straight days, and they had deliberately chosen not to. The humiliation of knowing you are alive only because your enemy considers you unworthy of a shot, that's a kind of defeat that leaves scars no force can ever heal. Let's talk about that torpedo, the one that cost everything. The Venezuelan torpedo ran for 11 minutes and 34 seconds before its fuel cells died. It covered just 7.2 miles of its intended 18-mile journey. Post-mission analysis confirmed it. Its 1970 seeker had locked onto a thermic line, mistaking a change in water temperature for a warship. It circled that lifeless patch of sea for 9 minutes, completely blind to the real target. The torpedo was rated for a depth of 400 meters, but it was operating in the Caribbean, where the seafloor is over 2,800 meters down. When its power failed, it began to sink. It fell for 43 minutes before the immense pressure at 1,200 meters crushed it into scrap metal. Ironically, the same depth that would have crushed the Sabalo, it had tried to escape by diving deep. Venezuela's entire military budget for that year was about $768 million. They had just spent $1.2 million firing at a carrier that burns through $18,000 an hour just to keep its reactors online. But the real loss wasn't the money. 19 other nations were monitoring that same frequency. And now they all knew that Venezuela's prized submarines could be tracked by technology older than email. The most powerful message was the one that was never spoken. The USSgerald strike group never altered its course. It never increased its speed. It never even sounded general quarters. When the torpedo launched, sailors in the fort's hangar bay were shooting hoops. They kept right on playing after the threat was neutralized. The carrier's massive defensive systems never even activated because the problem was handled 18 miles away by forces the Venezuelans never even knew were there. To spy satellites watching from orbit, it was just another ordinary day in the Caribbean. Nothing happened. But in naval headquarters from Beijing to Moscow to Tehran, military analysts saw something far more unsettling than an explosion. They saw a submarine attack dismissed with a sound wave. They watched an expensive, modern weapon fail against a defense network that didn't even bother to shoot back. And most importantly, they saw 64 sailors surface, alive. That meant America wanted witnesses. The harshest response isn't always violence. It's demonstrating such overwhelming control that your enemy's best shot becomes a public lesson, and their survival becomes their punishment. The Sabalo limped back to port with a crew that would never serve beneath the waves again. Not because they were afraid, but because every navy in the world now knew their submarines were relics that could be tracked from the moment they left the dock. In Caracas, the generals had to face a new reality, one that shattered decades of military doctrine. Their submarines weren't hidden, their torpedoes weren't lethal, and the Caribbean Sea belonged to whoever controlled the information. If this story reshaped how you understand modern power, hit that subscribe button and share this video, because the conflicts that never make headlines often reveal more about true strength than any war ever will. Thanks for watching.